Hey everybody, so I'm going to jump straight into this video tutorial. I thought I'll do a narration for this one, and hopefully it'll help you guys to kind of piece together what I'm doing a little bit better. So I like to start out with a grey background wash, and that's just to make sure that I don't burn my eyes out while I'm working against that stark white backwash. So after that, start out with a very fast sketch, concentrating on the gesture, the kind of energy that I want in my character, making sure that the composition is correct, and focusing on the proportions and the perspective, although more so on the idea itself. I want to, rather than focusing on the technical side of things, I want to leave room for my imagination to flow onto the page. After that, I start to refine the design, making sure that the facial structure and the proportions are actually pretty spot on before I go into the painting stage. Any key design elements are usually sketched in now, so if she were to be wearing some kind of crazy armor, or she had some kind of unique design elements about her, I'd start to throw them in now. So as you can see, I'm just refining that very basic sketch that I probably spent about 6 minutes on in the beginning. And I will erase and redo things over and over again to make sure that it looks right. So you see in the face there, I wasn't happy with it, and I wanted to redo it and make sure that I was, because I think the face especially, if you can get that right in the beginning, it kind of motivates you to keep on going with the rest of the image. It's in a funny way. But the cool thing about not spending too much time on the details at this point is that if I do make a mistake, it's not too much to erase it. You know, it's not like I've spent hours refining art or refining any particular area of the picture, so it's really not going to kill me if I have to erase and completely redo something that I've stuffed up. Adding in a few details, making sure she's got something covering up her parts. If you want to use your artwork in a portfolio, you want to, make sure it's not too X-rated, because that won't go down well when you want to apply for a job and potential clients are looking through your portfolio and seeing all these naked tentacle pictures. So I'll cover her up with something. In my case, I used a bit of slime. Thought that was probably appropriate. Adding in some details onto this giant squid monster that you see behind her. It's, I'm thinking about the material that it might be made of, and I'm thinking some kind of jello, slimy material. Once that's done, I flip the image around a few times just to make sure that there's no major mistakes or design or compositional flaws in it. And then I'll start to pick my colors. So I'll usually have 3 to 4 main base colors. I think for this one I choose a blue, a red, and a peach color for her skin. And I make sure that all of those colors go together on the color wheel. Once I've picked those base colors, I'll pick a highlight color for them and a shadow color. And that's all there is to it. I'll use the mid-tone or the shadow tone to lay in the base colors after that on a layer underneath the line art. And I'll just start filling it in. And I don't spend too much time being meticulous about this. I remember back when I was doing a bit of comic book art, back in the early days when I first started using Photoshop, I thought it was easier to use the pen tool and kind of trace around the outlines and just fill in the base color that way, but that actually took a lot longer than just painting in the colours with the brush tool. So do that, keep it reasonably neat. If you notice that you travel too far out the lines, just use the eraser tool to clean it up a bit. But it's just like a colouring in book at this stage. Try to keep inside the lines and you'll be fine. So this picture in particular really only has two main colours, the peach colour and the blue on this tentacle monster. And once I've got that down, I'll make a layer above the base colours but underneath the line art still, and I'll start to drop in the highlight colours. And just like in the beginning with the line art, I keep this very loose and very simple, making sure that I'm zoomed out so that I can get an overall look of the image, making sure that the lighting direction is correct and hitting the forms accurately. And basically from there I'll just keep on building it up, dropping in some shadows now. You can see some cast shadows underneath the on the leg there caused by her arm. Those cast shadows will really add an extra element of three-dimensionality to your artwork. Adding in some subtle hue changes within the base colours themselves, so you can see that I've added some red and green to the blue on the tentacle monster behind her, and I think that just adds a little bit of interest to the colours themselves. So I could just leave it as different brightnesses, different levels of shadow and highlighted blue, but I think by adding in the green and the red, it kind of just makes it a bit more interesting. So working on the face in particular here, I like to get that down first, make sure that I'm liking the face, because like I said before, if the face is looking good, it's going to motivate me to keep on going with the rest of the image. And the thing about faces is that it's probably the most expressive part of a character. I think you can see, it shows feeling, it shows emotion, it tells the story of a character. It asks the questions: why do they feel the way that why do they feel the way that they do? Why are they angry? Why are they sad? And I think that the face is just such an amazing way to communicate that. It's the best way to communicate it. It's the first thing that a viewer's eye is going to stop on, is a character's face. And it is important that you make sure your face is looking accurate when you're painting it out, because as people, as humans in the real world, we see faces all the time. When we talk to our friends or our family, we're focusing on their face, we're looking into their eyes. So we're very familiar with what a face looks like. That's why it's quite easy to tell when you've painted a face whether or not it's looking off, especially to an outside viewer. They might not know exactly what's wrong with it, but they'll know that there's something there that's just not quite right if you haven't drawn it accurately. So practice your faces, practice your hand as well, because they're the next most expressive part of a character. We use our hands to communicate quite a lot. So face and hands, two most important things about a character. If you can get them right, then the rest should be just as easy. Should be easier. The face and the hands definitely aren't easy to get right when you're starting out. So once I've got those basic kind of highlights done, I'll keep on layering on the highlights. Now really I like to work on probably the most minimal amount of layers that I can get away with at the beginning, so probably no more than 2 or 3 layers. But it's really up to the artist. I just layer the colors on top of each other. You could make another layer and do it in different passes, but for each kind of, you know, pass of highlights, but I'll maybe use 1, 2 or 3, and that's about it. Adding in some extra shadows, extra highlights. I think that's basically how the workflow of an image will go, is you'll begin to add more intense shadows, more intense highlights as you go along. But in the beginning, just keep it simple. Just like with the sketch, keep it simple. Because adding in too much detail in the beginning is, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. Because if you do make a mistake, or you notice that a major change needs to be made to the composition or even the proportions of a particular character or whatever it may be, you know, you're going to have to get rid of it all if it's not working out. So at least if you're keeping it simple and you're not spending too much time on it in the beginning, before you've really made the decision to stick with what you're doing and refine it, well, then it's not so bad. The other cool thing is that if your client or your employer comes to you and says, hey dude, you know, your deadline's been moved forward, at least you've got something to show for it. Hey, it might not be perfect, but at least you've got the major design elements down. You might have a bit of light rendering just to bring out the forms a little bit, and that's okay. You know, a talented 3D modeler or whatever could work from it, right? So bear that in mind when you're working. Keep it loose and simple in the beginning, because that also allows you to relax a little bit more and really put your imagination down onto the paper. And then you just go ahead and you tweak it. Start sculpting out the painting and refining it as you go along. Starting to refine the shadows and the highlights on the slime that's covering her leg there. Defining the different forms through highlights and shadows, of course. Really, it's just all about highlights and shadows. That's all there is to it. You intensify the highlights where they need to be intensified and make the shadows more intense where they need to be intense. And that's all there is to constructing an image, really. I think studying up on this stuff a lot will really help out your confidence when it comes to painting. So, you know, I certainly didn't start off this way with this kind of understanding. And I think, although you can be taught the technical side of this stuff, really the power comes, the learning comes when you're actually sitting down and you're doing this stuff. You're taking the action and you're making the mistakes, because there's no avoiding the mistakes. That's how we learn. That's how we get better. And I know that I've made many mistakes before drawing this artwork, and you know, if it wasn't for those mistakes, then I wouldn't have learned. You know, you touch a flame, you learn that it's hot, and you never touch that flame again. Same kind of deal with drawing, painting, whatever it is that you do, riding a bike, whatever. You make the mistakes, and there's a very good chance that you won't make them again. That's just the process of learning, and it's a powerful way of learning. Adding in shadows. I'm starting to really get down to the details and the nitty-gritty of this painting now. Of course, in the beginning I started out very loose and, you know, not putting too much thought into the details themselves. So remember that. Keep it simple at the beginning, and then add in the details, because the details, they really don't take that much thinking, to be honest. You know, I can turn on some music, talk on the telephone, and just chill out a bit when I get onto the details. It's that initial stage that takes the most amount of thinking. Just refining her hand there. You can see with her arm there, right, where the highlights on her arm end, you'll see that there's a very intense shadow on the leg beneath, and where the shadows end on her arm, there's a very strong highlight on her leg behind. And that really makes your forms pop off the page when you can contrast the shadows and the highlights in that way. Now, this hand I probably spent the most time on. Even more time in the face and the body and anything else. This hand was just giving me so much trouble. And I think in the end I will make mistakes, and if something's just not looking right, I will just erase and completely start again if I have to, because no matter how much icing you put onto a cake, if it's not made well, it's not going to make it taste any better. So I guess the metaphor there is make sure that your base is good. Make sure that the underlying structure of your image is good. And any amount of detail that you add on top of that is also going to look good. So just trying out different things to get this hand right. It was a bit of a headache actually. But it's always worth the extra time spent trying to fix it up, because it's not looking right. It's not really worth your time to make everything else look pretty and leave an eyesore in the middle of it. So I think in a way you can see that I'm refining that arm there, because unfortunately it was blending a little too much into a torso, which should have been really going back more into shadow. Adding in a bit of an outline, which I find kind of adds a bit of a nice finishing touch to a figure, to an image. It kind of brings it, separates it from the background a little bit more, and just solidifies the design. Adding a little bit more detail into the hair there. A few people had told me that it actually didn't look quite right, and I had to admit I agreed with them. So I wanted to make it a little bit more consistent with the tentacles of the monster, alien behind her, and I did that, and it was so worth it in the end to take that extra bit of time and just add in those little details. And I think that brings me to my next point. When people give you constructive criticism, use that. Do not take it to heart. Don't cry about it. Use it to actually better yourself. Even if there's not a lot you can do about the image that they're criticizing about, you can take what they're saying about it and you can use it in your next piece of artwork. I think constructive criticism is one of the most valuable tools that you need to get better, because just relying on yourself to gauge your level of skill isn't really going to work out, because you can't really see what level your artwork is at. If you're too close to it, you need an outsider to have a look at it and say, oh, this is off, this is off, this is off, and this is working, this isn't working, etc., etc. And all of this feedback is going to help you to apply what you need to apply in order to increase your skills. So very important, never take criticism to heart, because there's never going to be anyone who's not going to criticize your stuff. Again, adding in more highlights, just refining those forms, and you can see that kind of shiny, jello, lumpy texture on the alien behind her. You have to think about the material that your subject is made of. You know, if you've got a rubber ball sitting next to a metal ball, they both might be the same colors. You know, they both might be red, but there is something about that shiny metal ball that makes it look different to the matte rubber ball. And the difference is that the metal ball just has more intense specular, more intense shadows, maybe a bit of reflection, light reflection, whereas the rubber ball really doesn't, you know, interact with light in that way. So I guess the best way to get around that is just to do a few value studies, do a few painting studies, and that's really going to kind of teach you the differences between those different materials. Adding in some drop shadows or cast shadows, hard shadows caused by her hair there. And I think that's another thing that you really have to think about, is putting in your cast shadows. Again, they just really bring your figure to life. They really make the image pop off of the page. So for those of you wondering what specular highlights is, look, you can look it up online, but as a quick explanation, it's basically just the points of light on the subject which are most intense. Okay, so if you go back to the metal ball analogy, there's going to be a point on that where the light is most intense. Okay, and you'll see here on this tentacle that I'm working on at the moment, you'll see I add that very bright, very intense white, almost white highlight to it, and it just makes it look shiny. It's obviously only a very small area that it covers, but it's where the light is hitting that tentacle most intensely. So those drop shadows and the specular highlights, they're all things that you can add to your image to bring them to life. They're all tools that you can use to add to your image. And of course you could leave them out and, you know, your image would still look fine. No one would really notice, but if you do take the time to add them in there, you'll notice the difference. You'll see what it does to your image. Still refining different areas of the anatomy here, the hand. Adding in shadow to kind of hint at the different indentations and forms within the image. Now I make sure that I detail out the areas of the image that need to be detailed out. So obviously the feet, they're not as important as the face, for example. So I'm going to detail the face out before I detail the feet out of the girl here. So just keep that in mind, especially if you're on some kind of, you know, time limit. You want to make sure that you get the areas of the image refined that need to be refined, rather than spending time focusing on areas that really don't matter too much. So I'm going to add in a bit of a background here, just to kind of take her out of that white void that she's stuck in at the moment and give her a grounding in some kind of way. So I like to keep the background simple. Of course, if it was a full-blown illustration, I might spend a bit more time, you know, making it more complex and intricate, but I really don't need to for a character design. In fact, it's probably better to keep it more simple than complex in this instance. I'll put a shadow beneath her to kind of ground her. And And really, for a character design, that this is all you need to do for a background. You don't need to spend too much time on it. Adding in some adjustment layers. In terms of adjustment layers, I'll obviously sit it above all the other layers, and the adjustment layers that I do use are usually the curves and the color adjustments. I find the curves are probably the most valuable adjustment layer that you can use, because it just increases the contrast, brings out the colors, and really intensifies the image a lot more. And you'll notice the difference if you've ever played around with the curves adjustment layer. It just intensifies your image so much. Of course, I leave that stuff to the end usually, just as a final touch. Adding in a multiplier layer here to add in any shadows that need to be added in. If they need to be intensified. Same with the hard light. If there's any highlights that I want to add in. And doing it in that way allows you to add more intense shadows, more intense highlights without going over or getting rid of the detail that you've laid in beforehand. Zooming in a bit more now, really refining the different forms. Adding that specular to her eyes there. I think specular on the lips of a character and on the eyes, and even the nose, just again, they create that extra bit of depth to your image. Subtle highlights there on the inside of the tentacle. Outlining her hair a bit. Just really refining. It just comes down to really refining the forms through shadow and highlight. That's probably the one most important thing, is to make sure that you understand how to highlight and render out forms. If you can get that right, then obviously the proportion and the perspective and everything else you need to concentrate on. But I think once you can get those key elements down, it's really all there is to it. So that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I'll see you all next time.